Hello, welcome. Thanks for joining us today. We're broadcasting live from Park City, Utah, where I am. And you are Kelly, you're in Dallas, right? Or
Yep,
maybe you're traveling. I don't know. Yeah,
100-degree Dallas.
100-degree Dallas. So thank you all for being here. We have a lot of people joining. So if you have any questions, please feel free to put them in the Q&A or the chat box. We'll get to as many as possible. And the ones that we don't get to, we can answer post webinar. So feel free to put them in the Q&A or chat box as they come to mind. With Kelly's permission, we'll be recording this and posting it to the Family Office YouTube channel, and preferably your website, so we can drive people so they can understand what you're up to. This is going to be the first in a series of two. Today's more of a discussion interview, trying to get to know Kelly and what was the impetus for doing what she's doing today in the context of the private equity fund. And then the date is September 12th. We have a second opportunity to chat with Kelly, so you can look forward to that. We'll announce it to everybody. If after what you hear today, there are others in your world that would benefit from hearing what you hear, you can send them to the recording or put them in direct contact with Kelly. And of course, the objective, as usual, while we have no economic interest in the success of Kelly and the fund, we want her to succeed, but we're not participating in success fees and that sort of thing. We just put that out as full disclosure. But super happy to have you, Kelly. Welcome. Thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me this afternoon.
Yeah. Let's start at the beginning. I know the history and the bio and that sort of, but let's talk a little bit about the history and then what caused you to pull the trigger and take on the yeoman's task, or yeowoman's, or whatever the right way to say that is, of starting a fund. It's pretty exciting.
So, I'm 5 generations in oil and gas. So I've had some exposure to, the alternatives space my whole life. I have two parents that were CPAs in the accounting world. They were entrepreneurs. They were owning businesses, flipping apartment complexes, doing all sorts of different types of investments in the 80s and 80s. And so I was just had early exposure to creative around money. When I turned 15, I was basically told if I wanted anything outside of food, clothes, and a roof over my head, that I needed to go figure it out on my own.
Nice.
So I went and got a job in sales, selling car wash part-time in high school, got very good at it very quickly. So by the time I was 17, I was making almost six figures, which no 17-year-old should be doing without some sort of barrier. But I learned early that I liked making money. I liked finding solutions, working under creative operators. In high school, I tried a couple different colleges through the business programs and realized that I was paying all this tuition money to try to learn about business, people that never owned one and are reading me books they didn't write. And so I took that as my sign of, I'm just going to learn from the people that are out there doing it. And I worked in healthcare, I worked in construction, and on the business operations side. Ultimately, that led me to an opportunity in oil and gas. Because of my background, I think I was going to end up there one way or another, whether I liked it or not. And this was around the time that oil was creeping up to $130 a barrel. And given my industry knowledge, I was throwing up a bunch of red flags. But as a very young 20-year-old, wasn't taken seriously by the people that I was working for. And I said, best of luck to you. And about 6 months later, oil price crashes to about $30 a barrel. So I got to have my, told you so moment early in life, which I think has a lot to do with my confidence now. I moved to California, worked for a lot of other companies, emerging businesses, medical device, cannabis was really popular, helping businesses really hone in on what actually made sense for investors to get involved with, or if their idea was just plain bad and maybe they should go a different route than trying to bring in private capital. But because I came from an affluent home, I knew how to work with high net worth individuals. It was my entire upbringing. And it started to shift from helping businesses find investors to me helping investors find opportunity, which led me to family office. I worked in family office I just, I want to go out this on my own. And originally starting as a concept of our own family, I want to diversify and give access to diversified private equity opportunities because this has been my career for almost 15 years. How can I do the family office investment strategy inside of a fund for essentially anyone that wanted to get involved in private equity? So that's where we are today. And the catalyst was, COVID gave me the time and space to really develop this idea. And that's when I launched my firm.
So would you say that there was venture in there too, or was you
Oh yeah. I did
so
a lot of venture. We invest in venture. It's not a big portion of our portfolio, but a lot of what I was doing in California was early venture because it was 12 years ago.
in the last fund, we're going to talk a little bit about the last fund and what you're raising for now.
Sure.
But just can you share with us the types of things with or without specifically saying who they are that you've invested in, maybe to the asset class and the type of business? Be fun to see how you got your feet wet as a first manager and what the types of things you saw were interesting to invest in.
Sure. So because of what I was doing prior, I got to see how um, companies were built to go then find capital, and then how family offices were looking and doing due diligence. And some of those investors were good at doing that, and some of the investors were not so good at doing that. And thankfully, because I was working underneath them, they got to make those mistakes and feel the pain or the gain in those decisions. So I was in a very controlled environment. So when I decided to go out on my own, I really wanted to make sure that we were mitigating as much risk as possible. Remember, I had two CPA parents, so I've been doing my taxes since I was 16. Um, and what you have in here in the family office space is that you have a team of people around you when you're making investment decisions. Is it structured correctly? How is it going to affect my tax bill? How do I mitigate a tax event when I'm selling one asset to buy another asset? Like, these are all things that are, have a team of people around. And so every investment decision is very structured that way. That's not the same for every person. And for funds, I wanted to create a fund experience that was like that. So when we attack any deal that we're invested in inside the funds, we consider what's the tax of the capital coming in, what's the tax of the capital going out, and what's the tax situation as we, have as the fund lives. And then what are the opportunities that can create cash flow? Because I'm impatient. I don't want to sit around for 10 years for an equity exit. I want at least a small return while I wait for these potential large exits from our equity investments. So I put that all under one roof. And the first fund was really an opportunity to try this diversified strategy. And thankfully, it's worked out. We closed that a year and a half ago. We raised a significant amount of money at the end of 2021. We were able to pay our first dividends out to those investors in January of 22 of 2%. At this point, the investors have received about an 8 or a 9.25% return. We doubled the portfolio value in the last 18 months. And for the investors that took advantage of the tax incentives, have essentially written down their entire investment. So they have no more capital at risk, essentially, and they have a 2x return. And that's all because we were able to diversify from everything from direct working interest in oil and gas for the tax incentives and cash flow and real estate to venture startups that'll have an exit sometime in the next, 2 or 3 years. So in the meantime, they're getting their quarterly dividends, and it's sometime probably the next 18 months, we'll start seeing those exits start stacking up.
So is it fair to say that you've treated the portfolio of the fund like one would treat their portfolio of holdings, right? And,
Correct.
and it's always been amazing. And it's still something that is what's the best way to put it? Not attended to well is the tax issues, right? Uh, what kind of moves can we make before year end that would mitigate, offset things that would net produce more either income or net value? And it's been problematic because people don't, the smartest, sophisticated people that I know, they go, oh, wait a minute, you're right, we should do that. Forget it, let's do it next year, right? And it really makes sense to do it because there's levers like incorporating oil and gas types things in your portfolio, for example, which is, I guess, what you've done, right?
Mhm. Oil and gas, we have, renewable projects that produce tax credits. We harvest loss inside of the fund. So like most people are experiencing like, oh, I've sold this, I'm harvesting some losses in my stock portfolio to offset this capital gain that I'm going to have. And it's all happening with a team of people in multiple different, wherever their money's placed. And in our case, it's all happening inside of the fund. So for family office or even individual investors, you know, if there's a loss in the fund, they're not feeling it when it's happening because it's offsetting some other gain that's happening in the fund. At the end of the year, they get a single K1,
Yeah.
and all of the incentives are built inside of that one number that they end up with every year. And now, now we're working with family foundations and DAF providers. So now we can even do the charitable strategy around our investment strategy.
So that's interesting. It's not a pass through in terms of the tax issues on the K1, so
Can
they
be.
can use them.
It can be.
It
So
can be.
yeah,
Yeah.
so we allow investors to be what I call active LPs because I own the majority of the fund. I create these active opportunities for investors that want to also be GPs at the fund level, to capture the tax incentives. They eventually roll into being limited partners after the clawback period of oil and gas or renewables, which oil and gas 2 years and renewables is closer to 5.
So that's smart. So if I have a out independent of the investment I have in the fund, I can see that I could use these things in the balance of my portfolio that's not in the fund, that I become a GP level and participate directly. Although it's pretty efficient if you're an LP that you mixed up the batter to net produce a K1 that took advantage of all that stuff, and instead of having a taxable gain of X, you have a taxable gain of Y, right?
Correct.
Is that a fair way to put it?
Yes. And the way that I even mitigate that, because if you're considered an active LP like you are, you have to have the unlimited exposure, right? You have to have the liability in order to take the credit or the loss. And for a lot of people that they don't want that. But we keep enough in reserve to handle cash calls. I've been in the industry long enough to know like the types of wells that we're invested in. Now, the new fund isn't as invested in oil and gas as my two other funds, but the type of investment, the type of drilling we're doing, I know what kind of cash calls that we have the potential of being exposed to. So I try to keep cash reserves around so that I'm not calling investors and asking for $1,000.
Right.
I can put together a cash call of, $15,000 once a year without having to go out to investors and ask for it.
So let's talk about the construct of the new fund, and then how far along you are and what people can expect.
Sure. So we're raising $150 million. It's the same kind of strategy of this diversified private equity, everything from, a direct real tangible asset purchase to venture. We're not heavily into venture, and we're kind of in between of the growth and buyout stage. In the first fund, very diversified. There's a lot of different portfolio companies. We had 28 portfolio companies in the first fund. We're going to be a little bit more specific in fund 2, just because we've noticed that there's a gap in the investment dollars that have been in a space have been ignored. So really kind of our blue collar industries, very industrial, energy, infrastructure, and manufacturing. And so when I say infrastructure, it's more about like broken systems and not roads and bridges. Is the grid prepared for whatever? Do we have data storage, community development, like that type of infrastructure are the projects and stuff that we're looking for. We've officially opened in May. We have a few $1,000,000 of new capital. We have about equal, maybe a little bit more of existing investors moving in. So we're sitting about $6 or $7 million of capital in Fund 2 when we're just getting started. It's fun. It's Q3 and Q4. We do tax advantage investing, so a majority of our capital is raised during this period of time.
Yeah. So can we talk a little bit more about the gap.
Mhm.
Can you explain that a little more? That
So,
you've noticed and you're trying to
mhm.
close on this one, right?
So fund one was really about trying to find where the opportunities were. And in 21 and 22, there were a lot of opportunity. Um, Now we're seeing all the money went to tech, and like AI is hot topic now. And there's a ton of money moving that direction. But I've kind of always had a contrarian point of view where, there are these fundamental things that need to be invested in, or none of that matters. There's
Right.
been all innovation in technology, none of it in hardware, none of it in the infrastructure. So you can have all the AI bots in the world, but it doesn't matter if you can't turn the computer on or store the data.
Yeah.
So, those are types of things that we're looking at. One of the cool deals, everyone likes to talk about this one, and it's probably one of my favorite deals I've been a part of over the last several years. And that's I bought an ammo manufacturer.
Yeah, I saw
So,
that. Yeah.
um, and this is coming from somebody who doesn't own a gun, okay, but I own the ammo factory. And it was because I saw, I try to look at like very niche market trends that have not a lot of competition. It's I'm a big commodities person. So when I got connected into this space about 6 years ago, I thought there was something there, but I wasn't quite sure what it was. And about 3 years ago, it was like, oh, there's a supply chain bottleneck around the components of ammunition. And ammunition hasn't, again, been innovated in 100 years. You're talking about like Remington, Winchester, CC, like it's essentially the same exact process they've used since the beginning of time. It's 2024. Like we're moving towards robots shooting guns over people shooting guns. And so the reason why I bought it was because I wanted to be part of that solution of the bottleneck. So now we produce all the components of ammunition, the ammunition itself. And so now we can control prices, incentivize better behavior around ammunition and gun safety here domestically, and also support our allies out in the world. There's a lot of global tension, and sometimes I call my fund the Mad Max Fund. Um, and
I
a lot
love
of
it.
the assets are focused on like, are there these things going on a global scale that are going to, do we need energy independence? Yes. Do we need to have access to national defense solutions? Yes. Do we need to protect our grid, our computer infrastructure, our internet, and cybersecurity? Yes. So like those are the types of things that we're focused on in this fund, which is why it's so much bigger than our first two funds.
So the ammo company, without getting too much into the weeds, is it, the everyday prepper that wants to make sure it's got plenty of weapons and ammo in the vault, or is it more global in terms of uh, um, supplying global defense in this country and other countries?
It's both. So the biggest issue right now is that there's um, the big guys, and I don't know if anybody has any interest in this space, but is watching the Vista Outdoors deal. Vista Outdoors owns, the three largest ammunition manufacturers, CCI, Federal, and Remington. And so they're part of this $2 billion transaction with a European entity. It would be a bad thing if 90% of our
A,
inventory
a European country
is
that,
owned. Yeah.
that
So
owns our supply chain. I mean, it's
yeah,
going to go in the wrong direction, isn't it?
I don't think the deal will actually go through,
Yeah.
but there's nothing more American than a Texas made bullet. And so our facilities in Texas, it was built in the 40s. It's supplied ammunition for every major war that the United States have been a part of since then. And it's our responsibility to bring it back to life and replenish our own inventory for something that might happen, and to help our allies if something happens overseas.
Yeah, I love getting into the political discussions because it has controversy and there's usually two sides and it creates, but uh, uh, is there uh, is there trouble brewing for that type of company in the supply chain, uh, based on the type of democracy that we could see either go Republican or Democrat. And I'm not asking you to take sides. I'm just saying that's one of the things you have to consider, right? If it goes this way, what's that mean for the investment? It goes that way, what's it mean for the investment, right?
I think that the benefit of being in private equity is the private part
Yeah.
and being able to, you know, bend and flex your business depending on who's doing what in an easier way than if I were in the public space, right? Vista publicly, I mean, you've got publicly traded companies, CCI, they could be dramatically affected by whatever's going on. Us, because we are privately held, we can adjust based.
Adjust.
Yeah,
Yeah.
we can adjust. And I think that there's a lot of alignment. I make sure that I watch, both parties do whatever they're doing
I've
right
got them
now.
all going on at the
Yeah.
same time because it's really
And
interesting to see the contrast, right?
And it was interesting to see the Democrats change their narrative about the Second Amendment and be a little bit more vocal about that. So I think that they're trying to appeal more to the middle ground or a little bit more conservative leaning centrist for supporting the Second Amendment. And there's smart ways to do that without alienating, you know, really opinionated gun owners.
Yeah.
So for us, we can partner with both sides. I don't think it's an issue.
Yeah. That's good to hear. What's the old saying? I have the First Amendment. If you forget that, I have the second, right?
Yes.
Can say what I want. Yeah. That's super interesting. Is there another example you can share with us? That was fun. That was interesting. That is
Uh,
could be seen in the second fund.
we are looking at we haven't made we have made investments in this space, but industrial energy storage. So large industrial batteries, looking at technology that isn't lithium based or, rare earth metals that are,
I've seen a lot of that lately. Yeah.
yes. And, thankfully, I think that we've found a pretty good deal. I have a great relationship with the founder. I've been able to negotiate really incredible terms as far as our investment goes. And, I've secured a pretty significant discount on the equity, given that they're going into their Series B. And, being able to siphon tax credits from the projects that they're working on to further incentivize our fund two. About 30% of the second fund is going to be tax advantaged. So, to the point of a pretty significant return
Yeah.
just from that.
So what's the the advantage of not having lithium is the uh rare mineral part of harvesting the rare minerals, right?
Supply, cost, durability, recyclability, ESG. I mean, there's lots of things. Lithium isn't the future for anything, but also you don't have to use the same kind of technology that you would in like an EV battery that you would in a stationary battery that's, buried under
Yeah,
a building.
that makes sense.
And the company that we're, invested in has, it's 12 times the density of a Tesla battery, like a home battery. It's non-toxic, infinitely recyclable. And so you can, put it inside of a middle of a city under a building in your house and not worry about it, catching
Fire
fire.
blowing up. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. That's
It's
super
a
interesting.
true storage solution. And with California, I don't know where your audience is primarily located, but in California, they passed a law that any new commercial construction has to include battery and solar. So you cannot build anything in California without it. And they're kind of like first out of the gate as far as providing those solutions for companies that
Oh,
are building.
nice. Yeah. It's again, to be a little political, California is a beautiful place to live, and you can see why people want to stay there. But there's a tariff that's, it's pretty rough. You have
Yes.
have EV cars. Everybody has to have EV cars by a certain date, but don't plug your car in it because the grid can't stand it, right?
Yes,
Yeah.
correct. I think people that drive EVs forget the fact that like electricity doesn't come out of thin air.
Right. The
A
fossil
majority,
fuels powers this powers
yeah,
the generators that, right.
a majority of our power in this country comes from natural gas. So, which is, I think that's the reasonable transition fuel to a renewable source. I think technically natural gas is renewable, but it's infinitely available and it's so cheap. Um, one of the shale finds in Texas can keep Texas energy independent for like 200 years or something ridiculous. And that's just one, and it's what it sits underneath DFW Airport.
Yeah, look, my position on this, although it's irrelevant, what I think is that the optics of saying we're going to be all electric is kind of fun for people to say and suits, where you stand often depends on where you sit type thing. But the fact of the matter is the preponderance of our energy comes from fossil fuel and will probably in my and your lifetime and our kids and our grandkids, right? I mean, it's nice. It's probably smart to produce energy in other ways, diversification alone. But I don't think that just having electric cars is probably a plausible solution, right?
No. And you have like and just to prove my point, I have an obnoxious V8 Hemi truck too, but I have a plug-in hybrid because I wanted to see, okay, like what's all the hype about? And it you have to charge it in. It takes 13 hours to charge its little battery to
Yeah.
go 25 miles on the battery alone. Then the gas kicks in, or it does a hybrid or whatever.
Yeah.
It gets 23 miles a gallon. I got that in when I had the car before in my V8 like SUV. I got 23 miles the gallon.
Yeah.
So it's hard for me to justify, the plug-in hybrid is they should stop making them. Because
Yeah, it doesn't make sense. Yeah.
Toyota makes a regular hybrid. It has for a million years. I mean, the Prius is fine. It's an ugly car, but no offense to Prius owners, but you have, the RAV4s or any of their other, and the iForce they do now in the big trucks. You're getting mid-20s in the big trucks, and on your smaller SUVs, they're getting 35, 45 miles to the gallon. That is what you should be encouraged to own and buy and be incentivized by the government to buy before we switch over to something that's just not efficient.
Not, but and again, my editorial on that is I want to be in something big and safe. And so, the Escalade, it gets 20 miles on the highway.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a pig around town, but they've done a pretty good job with some of the, you know, fossil fuel cars.
Yeah, my truck isn't so efficient, but I need it, if I'm going out to well sites or, where I need to drive over something.
Yeah. Yeah. Everybody's got a pickup truck these days. You don't have to be.
Yeah. I'm in Texas. You're actually born and then in a pickup truck. So
Exactly.
yeah.
Yeah. All right. So let's talk about if people were interested in participating in the fund, what's the minimum? What are you looking for? What type of investors are interesting to you, or the ones that have already stepped up? You talked about a little bit.
So our average investor is coming in around $300,000, $500,000. Our minimum's 250 in this second fund. We take qualified funds. We take charitable, your DAF, your foundation money, either directly invested through your DAF, or we can set one up for you, and or cash. So there's a lot of different ways that you can invest. A lot of people do a blend because my energy fund is still technically open too. So if you wanted to have more exposure to oil and gas, for tax purposes, we have a lot of investors that, split their investment. The energy fund is $100,000 minimum. Part of what we're doing in the second fund is actually secondaries of my first fund, buying out the remaining limited partner interest in that fund. Because it's cash flowing, we're already cash flowing into fund two. And a lot of the investors from Fund I have moved into Fund II.
Yeah, that's interesting. Buying the secondaries. That's smart. Yeah.
Yeah, I really like the portfolio we've built and would like to keep it as much of it as possible.
Yeah. So far, is most of the investments domestic as opposed to abroad?
Yes, we have two foreign investments. One is in a European thematic indexing tool. It's by a team overseas. It's basically me and a Swiss family office invested. They do a lot of like tax harvesting, planning inside of their tool. It's actually a really cool little thing. We have a small investment in that. And then we own 1,300 acres in Jamaica in the Jamaican Blue Mountains. There's a Blue Mountain coffee farm there that we're a part of. But because I like to mitigate risk, we didn't invest directly into the company. We actually mortgaged the land. So we own the
So you have a
property.
lien. Yeah.
We have a lien on the land and equity in the company. So again, when I'm doing these types of deals, I don't accept, boilerplate terms from people. I'm not going to go into a deal that I don't have a lot of control over how we get invested. And there's a tax harvesting uh, carbon credit project around that deal too, which is why I want to keep it for a little bit longer. We could sell the property and realize a pretty significant return today, but I'm looking for a much larger return down the road.
Well, I'm not familiar with it, and it's not to be negative, but is the rule of law pretty reliable in Jamaica?
Yes, it is. They have a lot of, especially when it comes to agricultural stuff. So with, I don't know how familiar you are with Blue Mountain Coffee,
I
but
love it. I've been there
yeah,
many times. It's great. Yeah, yeah.
it's very regulated. So it's got to go through customs basically twice. It has to be certified by Jacques first that it is 100% Blue Mountain
Uh,
Coffee because it has to come from a very specific part of the mountain range. And then because you'll have a lot of things that say they're Blue Mountain, but they have like a blend or whatever. And as far as the real estate laws go, I mean, it's a pretty intense process to own the real estate there. And even just like sever real estate from one parcel to the next. So it's pretty robust. And I don't know if people understand the relationship between like Canada and Jamaica, but it's very similar to like the United States and Mexico as far as like migrant farming goes. So
that's
the
interesting. Yeah.
group that I am partnered with on this deal is out of Canada, and they have a very good close relationship with the agricultural space in Jamaica because they come up to Canada for stone fruit season.
Oh,
So just like migrant farmers come up to California for whatever season, very similar. So they've just have a 20-year relationship with, the politicians down there in the space. And so it's a unique deal to be a part of. We've built roads, bridges, and the community out there. We're one of the largest employers in that part of Jamaica. We're the highest paid employer in that part of Jamaica. So it's really about like, yes, the profit side's great, but we're building and empowering an entire community.
yeah. Just really create an opportunity for a local workforce, right?
Yes.
Yeah, we've done that in Brazil. I have a coconut plantation there,
Okay.
but you know, it's a different doing business in Brazil is you know, everybody has their hand out, but that's a
Yes.
different story. Yeah. So super cool. So thanks for sharing this. This has been really interesting. And to get a little bit in the weeds about some of the portfolio companies is always interesting to the community and gives a little bit more color on where your head's at in terms of deploying capital, right?
Yeah. And I think it's important that, we're looking at venture. We don't typically invest at the idea on a napkin phase. Typically we're getting involved when they've generated some revenue. And the only thing that's keeping them from either break even or profitability is just some manpower and some experience. And so that's kind of where we get involved. I think there's some questions though over here I see.
Yeah. Um, so somebody wants to reach out, we'll make sure they get in touch. And then somebody was talking about Bitcoin.
Okay.
How do you feel
Um,
about
I personally am invested in several different cryptocurrencies, but I have been since 2015. Um, as far as the funds go, we invest in companies that are building solutions on the blockchain, not cryptocurrency. Um, we think that there's, just like people talk about AI, like there's use cases for this technology. And so we're invested in the infrastructure that's being built on those systems. We're actually creating the infrastructure for, a digital future.
Yeah, so you're not like Sailor and taking the corporate treasury and buying a bunch of Bitcoin, right?
Yeah, we're not doing any cryptocurrency. My personal, I haven't changed my crypto portfolio in a few years. So I'm sitting on everything that I've bought, and I probably won't buy anymore.
Yeah, probably a good idea.
Yeah.
We did a lot of the pitches when the crypto came out. It was really fascinating to see how much nonsense was going on. But yeah,
Yeah. My brother happens to be an expert in that space. And so um, he worked for Stanford for several years and has built a lot of things on the blockchain and does a lot of things with AI. But so it's been nice to have him, at the dinner table a couple times a year to be like, this is something real and this is something not real. And so that's a little advantage that I have, I think, over my competition.
yeah. I think it's a real advantage, Kelly, because I have a couple of those people too who essentially have built the portfolio of some of the largest crypto investors. And so I get and they happen to have been really good friends before they became, the people to talk to. And, I get the real, okay, what about this? No, skip that. Right. So it's a
Yeah.
real advantage getting something who doesn't have an agenda selling you something or have such a strong libertarian uh, process or position that no matter what's going on, it's the right solution, right?
Yeah.
The extremists. So that's a real advantage. So enjoy that as well. Um, yeah, so super, super helpful. Thank you for doing this. Really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me. I have enjoyed our talks before this and this one too.
Yeah, me too. So we're going to be doing it again soon. We'll let everybody know uh, uh, with an email and so forth, and then put everybody in touch with Kelly, of course. And we look forward to tracking how you're doing, and then make sure we get everybody in touch. And like I said, if there's anybody that that might be interested in chatting with Kelly, you're most welcome to do that. Let's just look at this question real quick. Can you provide contact information? Yes, we will.
Sorry about that. I don't know what just happened.
You want to just give everybody shout out your email address that you want them to use?
So my email address is k.winget, WINGET, at alternativewealthpartners.com. You can also connect with me on LinkedIn. Our website is alternativewealthpartners.com. And we're pretty easy to get a hold of. If you Google me, you can find my cell phone number.
Yeah, right. Do
Been
you
on the
see
internet.
do you see the chat?
Yes.
We get lots of love.
That is lots of love. Thank you. Thank
Thank you.
you.
Yeah, we'll make sure. So thank you, Kelly, and thank you all for joining us today and sharing with us the only thing you can't make more of, and that's your time. Till next time. Thank you, Kelly.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.